Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the next Shifting World of Work webinar brought to you by Circal. My name's Kevin Green. I'm the chair of Circal's advisory board, and I will be chairing today's webinar. With me, two fantastic speakers, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. First up is Bertie Tonks, who is currently the Global Director of People and Culture at Collison. And Collison are the people that run affinity programs for banks, but I always think of them as the lounges. What's it called? Priority Plus, is it? I think it's
Priority Pounds is Priority Lounge. Sorry, Priority Pass is our hero brand, but we've got many other kind of parts of the business. So
yeah. But Bertie's had a 30-year career in HR. He was a talent OD. He's worked in professional bodies, oil and gas, media and publishing, extensive experience in the Middle East and the US. So what Bertie brings is a practitioner's view. This is how I've used Agile. This is what I've done. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. Our other guest speaker or guest on today's webinar is Perry Timms. And Perry is a founder and chief energy officer of PTHR, an 8-person global consultancy. A 2-time TEDx speaker, twice publisher. I've got his new book here. I would recommend it, The Energized Workplace, a great read. So, and that only came out last week. So again, I think it's very apt in terms of the experiences that many people are going through in terms of the world of work. And I think it's great because it really is quite challenging from an HR perspective. Perry is an adjunct professor at Holt Business School and Ashridge Management, visiting fellow at Cranfield. He's a proud member of the CIPD, and he's also 3 times been in HR Magazine's most influential thinkers, and in the top 10 in both 2018 and 2019. But the reason why Perry's here with us today is he's a big advocate for HR leaders and functions using Agile. So let me just sort of do a quick introduction on why we've got a webinar around Agile, and then we'll get over to both Bertie and Perry because they'll be doing most of the talking. I suppose the reason is at the moment, most organizations were already in an environment where, you know, the world was speeding up around us. You know, if you think about dislocation and disruption, businesses staying in the SP 500, you know, in the 60s, it was 33 years, 24 years in 2016, projected to be 12 years within the next 2 or 3 years. So clearly businesses are changing, businesses are dying, organizations are having to adapt and change and respond to the context and environment. I always think about the unpredictability of businesses. You know, I always think of those, if you think of that Wile E. Coyote in the sort of cartoons, you know, you run off the cliff and you keep running. You know, you're still running and you're in suspended animation because it's only when you drop you realize that the world's changed around you. And I think that's where a lot of organizations have been in the last couple of years and clearly find themselves. So I think we already had a period of disruption and dislocation. And what's clearly happened is COVID has got organizations to do 2 or 3 things. And we know this. The first thing is just how do we survive? How do we look after our people? How do we function in this new world? And again, over the last few months, I think organizations have been pretty good at responding to that challenge. Secondly, though, I suppose there was a bit about, well, how do we return? What does that look like? How do we have lots of hybrid working? How do we have people at home? How do we deal with different countries, some opening, some closing, some having second spikes? So there's been a movement, I suppose, from sort of crisis into just business as usual, but having to respond and adapt to the changing environment. And then thirdly, and I think this is where this webinar comes in, lots of HR directors that I've been talking are going, we're having to think about what we do and how we operate and what markets we're in, what's our organizational design, how do we think about our culture, how do we retain the trust, how do we retain the engagement which is improved, but become more responsive, more agile, do things quicker, bring products to market, move from products to services. All of that thinking, I think, is happening as we speak. And again, I just noticed that if you look at the Google searches for Agile, particularly from HR, you know, there's been an exponential rise. Survey by Gartner says that 63% of HR functions are already using Agile. So it's already out there, it's being used. But I think there's a, you know, I think there's a lot of people that are using some of the tools and the techniques. But I think what we really want to be talking about is not just project working, but perhaps operating models. Let's think about how we use Agile to think about how HR provides value. So that's really why we're running this webinar. I'm hoping that you participate and engage. I think many of you have already found the chat box. Please ask us any questions as we go through. Perry and Bertie, you don't have to worry about that. You just give us your great insights and value, and I'll keep an eye on those and feed the questions in. And then hopefully, now knowing us three, it will be tough for us to finish on time. But if there is some time at the end, there's a Q&A box where you might want to give us a bit more insight. You might want to give us an example or tell us about something that you've done that you think is worth us sharing. So please start thinking about populating that as we go through. I suppose the other thing to say about Agile, where did it come from? It came from software development, the idea that developing products and services needed to be done differently, you know, and the Agile Manifesto from 2001, 4 key principles that I think most of us would go back to, and that is individuals and interactions over process and tools. So let's not just think about our process and think about HR. You know, we love a good process and a good policy. So how do we get into that? Thinking about software over documentation. So let's try things, that whole iteration. Collaboration and customer over contract negotiation, and responding to change over just following the plan. So I think that gives us the context. And again, I did say that, you know, I'm sure we will hear about multidisciplinary teams, Kanban, sprints, iterative working, retrospectives. We'll talk about some of the tools and some of the ceremonies, but let's get into it. So Bertie, tell us about how you first came into contact with Agile. What attracted you to it, and how did you first use it? What was your first attempt?
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. And first of all, big shout out to anyone that's working in an HR field at the moment. This is really tough. It's tough for everybody. But I think we need to recognise as well, this is our time. So keep on. It's not going to last forever, but this is our time to get where we always wanted to be. So back to your question then, Kevin. So our teams at our IT teams at Collins have been using Agile ways of working for many years. Always interested me, but I was never knew too much about it. But what I really liked was this iterative working to drive value, because I've never really felt that those long-term strategic plans that we build out and then all the detail beneath that really work for us. So, and what I know anyway from my own kind of education and in kind of talent and OD was that the concept of self-organizing teams, I know from my own kind of insights and experience, tend to deliver much quicker if they're well structured and organized than traditional hierarchical ones. So every year I run an annual innovation day for my team, people and culture globally. And this is really around every year, what can we do to flip tradition on its head and do things very differently? So then a couple of years ago, I got this guy called Perry Timms.
never heard of him.
No. So he came along, and actually so did our CIO. And Perry's brief was, look, engage and excite our team so that I can get everyone on board with this and we can just run at it. So, you know, our initial education and excitement on this topic actually came from Perry. And what I really loved and I took from Perry's session was that by design, the Agile methodology is really people and results focused. I'm always hearing from my leaders, what are the outcomes, not the inputs, what are the outcomes? So it's an approach that genuinely puts the customer at the heart of almost every decision and action that you drive. And in the people and culture or HR world, that customer is the employee experience, right? So it's what can we do to drive greater value for the business? And straight away from Perry's session in particular, we were on the hook, I have to say.
Okay. Just tell us about the first thing. So there was the innovation day, energy, loads of great ideas. what was the first, the first project you gave to a team to have a go at? What was the first sort of practical thing that you did from an HR perspective?
I've got to say, well, it was more of an exercise, because once we'd had this session with the Innovation Day, we decided to jump fully in. But the exercise that we did, and it was a really simple demonstration of how self-managing teams drive value quicker, more efficiently than hierarchical ones. You get a room of 50 people, you get 25 on each side, and you say, right, this side, you've got a manager that has to organise you in age order. And that person is responsible for organising you. The other side, you're going to do it, but you do it however you self-organise. You do it, and within 15, 20 seconds, the self-organising team has all done the job. The one with the manager trying to give clear instructions and directions is still trying to figure out, the manager's still trying to calm everyone down to the point where they have control. So I think once we'd had that session, we were full in, if I'm really honest, and I can talk a little bit more about that as we go.
Okay. So Perry, let's move over to you then. So you've been at the Vanguard. I can remember, I think, it must have been 6-7 years ago, seeing you talk somewhere where you were talking to an HR audience and talking about Agile. Tell us why, how you came about it. You've been in the HR space yourself for a very long time. So what did you see in Agile? And then tell us about, how you've sort of promoted it and worked with some of your clients.
Definitely. Similar to Bertie, actually, in that my initial interest was sparked about 15 years ago by self-managed organisations. So, I read Ricardo Semler's Maverick book, which is almost like a touchstone for that particular movement. But Gary Hamel's work as well about sort of delayering organisations and removing managers as being blockages. And it really chimed with me, because I was in IT projects in the 1990s when there were huge lumbering beasts that rarely delivered what they should have done, both in the product and the value. Right, and I saw Prince 2 as a very clever methodology to build a bridge, but actually a pretty obstructive methodology to build a piece of tech, because you spent so much time servicing the industry, you didn't build the product. And so I was really, really interested in how self-managed teams almost broke those rules, and it was through that route that I found Scrum and Agile. And I kept thinking to myself, there's absolutely no reason why this can't work in HR, just on principle. But I think I boiled it down to better results and more fulfilled people in their work. And I just thought that's what HR's here to do, deliver better results through people being more fulfilled. And it was only when I dove into it, and though this kind of underscores Bertie's point, that it was so user obsessive that I thought this is what's missing in HR work, right? I worked with an HR director who quite literally was a policy mill. He just churned out policy on policy, whether people needed it or not, right? And I looked at those policies and thought, who on earth would buy that if they had to pay a subscription for it? And the answer was nobody, because it didn't have people in mind. It had preventative measures or obstructive sort of gateways for people to make decisions. So I think there's definitely something in it where it's like this liberated sense, both for the people building the product, but for the people who use the product. And so I just thought that's absolutely what we need to do and be more of. I saw some of it in the learning profession too. I saw the learning profession start to get a little bit more obsessed with the learner experience, if you want to call it that. And so I could see some design thinking coming in there as well. And I thought this is a nice little fusion. And so when I wrote the book Transformational HR in 2017, I kind of created a model that was about HR being more fluid. And I thought it needs to operate agile in order to deliver on a more fluid proposition, not silo-based divisions in HR, but movable entities who would swarm around a problem, use agile to solve it, and then go back from whence they came. So that's where it interested me. And in terms of applying it, so, I mean, Bertie's organisation is renowned for its kind of pioneering spirit. But I've got some interest from people in healthcare, in local government, in charities, where actually, money and resource is an optimal thing. They cannot afford to sink money into anything wasteful. And I think what they saw was that Agile is like an extension of Lean. It is incredibly efficient and proficient in how you optimize people's resources. Bertie's example of the lineups is exactly a manifestation of what you see in Agile. So I worked with a few local authorities and healthcare providers and charities and just saw it take off.
It's interesting that it was charities and local authorities and not-for-profits that grasped this early. You'd have thought there'd have been leading edge technology businesses or software companies going, God, we've used this elsewhere. This has got a way of transforming how we manage and lead. Yeah. And have you seen it transfer across into other sectors?
I have. I think what was working in the local authorities' favour is they were stripped by austerity so much. They had no room to manoeuvre in any other way. They needed to be more bureaucratically efficient. And so Karen Bevan at River Island was a real pioneer here. She absolutely bit on Scrum. And that came from us running a hackathon with comms, and then people could see what you could do. And she started talking to her tech team, a bit like Bertie's organisation has that duality. So I think, I've seen it now working in commercial entities. Yeah, and I've worked with financial organisations in Romania. I've worked with recruiters in Slovenia, engineers in different parts of the world. So actually it translates beautifully. The focus is what's the product we're building to solve a problem for people, end of.
Okay. Let's have our first poll. So just want to pop this up, Robin. This is just about a quick question to our audience, really, very much around telling us where you are. Are you currently using Agile in your HR function? Extensively, consistently, occasionally, or rarely? I'm really, really keen. Probably let's start. I think we've got 60, 70 people on the webinar. Let's try and get all of you to answer it. I'd really appreciate that, so that we just get a flavour of where you are at the moment. Come on, I'm looking for some more voting. I've only got 50% of you voted so far. Don't be shy. We've got 3 personalities here that are desperate to give you some insight. So let's see. Okay, so a few more, a couple more people still voting. So what it says to us at the moment, guys, is no one's using it extensively. Of the sort of 50 odd people, we've got a few people using it consistently, a few people using it occasionally, but a high percentage, 40 odd percent, not using it at all or rarely using it. So I think what we can clearly see is we've got an audience here who perhaps aren't using it. So why don't you just try and bring it to life for us a bit, Bertie? So after your day, you do your innovation day, you identify some projects. Tell us about, some of the processes that you use. What did you go about doing? Self-managed teams? What were the issues that you worked on? How did you develop the capability and the skills to deploy Agile? Tell us how you sort of implemented it.
And that's quite interesting, that bit. What did you decide to work on? Because in traditional HR terms, from my own experience, where we would go to is, right, what are we going to do around recruitment? What are we going to do around people development?
Process,
This takes a very different lens, and we do that largely through a range of ceremonies, which I'm sure you can elaborate on this even further, Perry. But one of the first things we do is we create squads, and these are self-organising teams. So when I'm in a squad, I'm an equal. As our global people and culture director, I'm our equal to anyone else in that squad, no greater or lesser voice. And then what we do is we develop these things called user stories. So the squads effectively each have in Agile terms, you call it a product, but you effectively, this will end up to be a project. But what you do is you develop user stories, and they're really, really focused around the customer needs. So it's a different starting point, very much so. And so what you do is you create these user stories, and the kind of what that looks like is something like this. So you look at your different stakeholders. So who are our customers? So in my company, it's our leaders, our managers, our people, for example. And you look at these extensively, almost as a brainstorm, creating these user stories. And you say, as a manager, I need to have more support to make sure I'm supporting the development of my people in order to raise the capabilities of my team. And what you do is you create these big kind of long lists of this stuff. And then what you do is you go into something called another ceremony, which is called planning poker. It's one of the biggest gifts you ever gave me, I think, Perry. And planning poker is you got these cards, or you can do it online, actually, free software. And what you do is you once you've got all of your user stories, you have to kind of create some priority ordering around these things. So the planning poker ceremony is great, because what you would normally do is get into a debate and a discussion around priorities. The strongest voice normally wins, and the quieter voices don't get their say. So with planning poker, you call out the story, and then you vote, and it's like a blind vote. And at the end of that vote, you all share your cards or whatever, your numbers at the same time, And then at the end of that vote, you ask the lowest and the highest voting to give why it is, what's their rationale. So you're hearing opposite ends of the spectrum. And then you revote. And then it's that vote that gives you your sense of order around the priorities.
Yep.
We use that really broadly now. But there's another one of the ceremonies is around the stand-ups, where it's regular points, scheduled points every single week, where the squad meet to see, the format of this is, what happened since we last met? What am I working on now? And for the next period ahead, what's to come? And that format actually we've used now, we've introduced even that element of Agile across all of our leadership meetings globally, outside of people and culture. And then we do sprints or retrospectives. I'm not going to go too much into detail here, but this is a point where normally on a monthly basis for us, each squad meets and they do a review around what's the journey been like. And oh my gosh, it's a really powerful way of getting teams to get into this habit of being really honest around the importance and cadence of feedback. So what hasn't worked, what's broken. They talk about where the loose or weaker parts in the team are. Now, they need help with that. We can talk about that a little bit later on. But those ceremonies, they're only some of the Agile methodology, but they're the ones that we've adopted, and I think they're immensely powerful for delivering results.
So you've talked a bit about the ceremonies or the way in which you've used Agile. Give us an example of something that a team's worked on in relation to people, that have gone through that process. And I suppose I'm looking for a compare and contrast. This is how we would have done it 10 years ago. This is how we've, improved our engagement or hiring of frontlines. Doesn't matter what it is. Just tell us a practical example of how you've gone through that, the planning process, the stand-ups, the sprints, the retrospective, because I'm really trying to get people to understand the difference.
Yeah, well, we around the same sort of time as we look to introduce this, we were also planning to kill off the annual appraisal and move the whole business to a more kind of quarterly focus on our objectives. We no longer have an end of year, we just have rolling quarters in terms of that cadence globally. So what we needed was a more iterative way to deliver that piece of work, because we needed to make sure that the whole organization was on board with us, let alone get our story, our processes, all that great stuff kind of in place. Yeah. So we actually use that as the test bed, as it were, really, to get us into a different pattern of working. What that meant was, along the way, there were lots of challenges from our leadership in particular, saying, we need these annual planning process. We need these annual objectives. No one likes annual appraisals anyway. Why are we going to have 4 of these a year now? And so we're saying this is little and often is what we're moving to, actually. And what that meant was, because we were working more iteratively, I think, as my CEO says, a good, well-detailed plan is dead the moment it's written. So what was good about the iterative process was that as and when these challenges were coming in from my leadership or from elsewhere in the business, they were immediately being fed into the squads. And because they meet 2 or 3 times a week, that immediately was being fed back into the user stories and how can we adapt this very quickly to demonstrate we're delivering Agile, they call it minimum viable product, but it's how can we deliver the smallest thing to show that we're listening, but very, very quickly. And that actually has quite transformational results, because you're no longer waiting for the big project to arrive.
Yeah.
You're continuously listening, delivering feedback.
And that's completely... Sorry. I'll come to Perry, but that is quite different from an HR function that tends to work top down. Let's think about the problem, create a policy, create procedures. We know best. We're going to basically tell the business this is the performance management system. So what you're doing is you're bringing groups of people together, create in a different way, listening, adapting, trying stuff, piloting stuff, learning and going again until you find the right solution for the business. So it is a completely different approach to putting in place a new people system.
Yeah, and what was really nice, Kevin, I visibly noticed and felt the difference. Instead of feeling like when managers and leaders are criticizing and saying, well, what about this? I felt differently about it, because what was happening, I was like, thank you, that's really useful. I'll feed that into our squads. And so it was that test and learn type of mentality. So actually, I even felt myself being less defensive around this is the right thing to do because it's the way we need to go.
Okay, Perry, obviously you helped Bertie on the journey, and you've talked about working with a range of different organisations. So tell us a little bit about, just some of the stories, really, particularly things where I suppose you stand back. That's one of the great things in what we do. We've got the time to stand back and reflect and think. And so I suppose, I don't know, 7-10 years on, what are some of the really important things that organisations need to be aware of? So perhaps give us a couple of examples and then some reflections.
Definitely can. So in the local authority world, I was asked to come in a similar way to how Bertie ended up setting up his teams, to create more pace and creativity in change within the organisation and outside it. And so the two kind of conflicting parameters were a digital agenda outside for a council in Salford to serve their citizens better, and then the internal mechanisms that were needed to build that in a better way, because they for 3 years had struggled to get the right products out. So I came in, and luckily there was a transformation director there who absolutely knew something different needed to happen. Now that's an important point. So Bertie sponsored his own Agile kind of revolution. And it's sometimes very difficult to go into an organisation to say, let's decouple and create this slightly more looser fitting format, because people go, but where's the rigour, where's the governance and all that kind of stuff. So you instantly get people who push back and say, this is messy and it's only for tech companies, when absolutely it's not. So the transformation director absolutely believed this was the right thing. And they started their process by saying, we need to learn to be confident and capable in this, so can I help them do that? So before we even tackled a piece of work outside of that confine, we brought the work in as examples to learn with in an incredibly safe space. So there were about 100 people they identified who volunteered themselves in to learn about this, because they were frustrated by the lack of progress. And straight away, one of the most, I suppose, powerful things they did was, we don't want the usual suspects. We're not going to select people. You don't have to be a project manager. If you want to come in and solve a problem, it doesn't matter what your role, experience, or level of seniority is, come in and help us do it. So we had 100 willing people. So within about 6 weeks, we got through the cycles, both in a sort of compressed way, because it was in a learning environment, but actually starting to build the working systems. So that was my piece of work, really. And then I stood back and let them get on with it. And what they did after that was they created a space where you can go to work Agile, so that you can use wall space. You can differentiate yourself from the normal desk environment you're in. And so people actually sort of found that a really healthy detachment from normal work. The director kept the air cover, so people didn't interfere. But what happened was people got incredibly committed, incredibly creative, and incredibly collaborative about how they worked. So about 6 months after we started that program, 6 new citizen-based technology products were launched. They had completely rewired how they work on things internally for selecting people onto projects. They went and won Digital Council of the Year. So 3 years stuttering, 6 months of applied effort, 6 products, and Digital Council of the Year. And so that council has carried on working like that. Andy Burnham's interested in it as a Greater Manchester Combined Authority model, but their COVID-19 responses were super fast and super well enabled, because they were already conditioned to swarm to problems, irrespective of grade, low bureaucracy. They set up a testing centre for COVID-19 at the Rugby League Stadium in Salford in under 48 hours. They developed an app to help people learn how to use Microsoft Teams and other software from their homes in 48 hours. And they swear that would have taken them weeks before. So this stuff's really powerful when it's understood and people know how to apply it. So that's one example. The other one, which is not quite such a long story, Bank in Romania, very strong on training new people very, very deeply. But after 6 months, they were poached by competitive banks, and they wanted to stop that. And so they tried and tried and tried. They tinkered with reward, done all sorts of things. Anyway, they let half a dozen HR business partners and recruiters in a room to say, what would you build? So within about 2 weeks, they had resolved the issue about equipment not being delivered on time and so on and so forth. They had low manager engagement. Within 4 weeks, that was sky high. And then by the time I left the project, they had developed an app that took people from the point where they were given their, yes, you passed the interview, right through to, yes, you've passed probation. And they are now pinning that on an exciting and really sticky way to stop people being poached, because they've got this career path, this long-term journey. And that all happened in under 6 months, and they would never have done that, they told me. So
fantastic, both great stories, Perry. So taking on that sort of reflective bit, when you stand back and what do you think are the right ingredients for success? So what will make an agile, let's just say, project rather than transformation, because we'll come to that in a moment. But, you know, somebody that goes up, you know, a business that goes, actually, I think we should try something. Is it leadership? Is it space? Is it environment? Is it, what just give us the ingredients. So if I'm sitting here as an HR director thinking, this sounds quite exciting, what do I need to get this moving, to get this kicked off?
So I think it helps if you like Bertie and you really, really know that this could help you, because you have got the senior clout and the stakeholder kind of trust to do that. But even if you're not in Bertie's type of position and you're in a BP team or something, you can just try it in your zone and in your space and prove it works, and then start escalating up based on evidence. Because what Bertie's alluded to is the retrospective side of this is the best post-implementation review system I've ever seen, because like all the Prince 2 projects I ever worked on, they said they did a PIR, but it was rarely effective, and it was far too long down the line that people had even forgotten the product. This is right in the heat of it. So you get evidence at each stage of each experiment about whether it's working and to what level. So I'd say create a nice little epicenter of this, even if you're not a senior person who can do it at scale, because you've then got a really compelling case to get the senior person to buy into that and start pushing it through. I have had a client who in financial services tried to do a complete blanket across the entire organization agile, and it flopped, no wonder, and now they're completely averse to it, but they missed the trick because they didn't start small and build. And that's exactly what I'd say to everybody: start small, get some wins and build.
So if you're an HR director, you're sitting here listening to this, you fancy it, it's, you know, it has, you know, self-organizing, some learning, better results, start small, give some air cover, get a group of people, get them working on it, and build your experience and capability from there.
Exactly. And I'd even add to that, tackle one of those problems that is just a weeping sore that's never been tackled, because this will help you tackle it.
So, Bertie, back to you. You've told us a bit about how you kicked off this first project. What have you done with Agile since? You know, it sounds like it's, you know, it's pretty comprehensive. It sounds like it's the way you do business now, not just in people and culture, but across the organization. So tell us a bit more about some of your successes, you know, some of the benefits of doing this stuff.
Well, some of the benefits, I think, if we just talk about within the HR or people and culture team, for me, one is this idea of creating squads, as Perry pointed out, where you can actually release this motivation that you never really expected to exist. So we created squads that are, doesn't matter what role you play, what level you're at within the people and culture team, are there some squads that you want to be part of? Now, there's some learnings around that as well, which I can share a little bit later on, which you know, it's not always a perfect story, let's be honest. So
no. Tell me now. You got me out. You whetted my appetite.
Okay.
So tell me where it didn't go quite right. What happened? You know, and how do you get it back on track?
Because it felt like we got really organised around this. You know, we had our CEO give do some education, some further education and training around the ceremonies. You know, all that kind of stuff. The agile way of working. I had one of my team trained actually as an agile coach, and I'd highly recommend that because it's dirt cheap and you've got specialist skills sitting within the team. That's a really good resource to have. But we'd set up these squads and they were multifaceted. You know, probably we said no squad shouldn't have any more than 6 people was our own decision. But some of those squads were people who were very quiet, perhaps, or wanted to be part of this journey, but perhaps didn't have the energy or the right level of thinking or capability to be able to apply. So what we felt is some of the squads, and this came out in the retrospectives, felt like 4 or 5 people might have been carrying what, you know, a 1 or 2 in the squad, and that's not the idea of Agile. And there were some of those squads through the retrospective said, actually, we're finding it really difficult to lean into this challenging conversation. Mohammed is absolutely brilliant. He wants to be part of this squad, but he's adding no value whatsoever. And I was like, great. So how are you going to deal with that? And again, this is the squads. You know, we can build up their capabilities. There's lots of training and stuff you can do around this. But so how are you going to lean into this? So we learn that actually this makeup of squads is you have to be very mindful and make sure people are keeping their eye on that. But we did find that they also need quite a lot of support around how they can lean into those more challenging conversations. Interestingly, skills that as an HR professional, you need to keep on sharpening anyway throughout your career. Yeah. That was a big shout out for me.
So some of the learning, some of the, is it when, the squads come back and talk about the capability, don't abandon it, encourage them to deal with the issue, get them to take ownership of stuff. So, what are some of the learnings about, because again, what it's like, a lot of organizations will be quite nervous around a completely different approach of developing products and services. And when it starts to go wrong early on, or you get some negative feedback, it's quite easy to go, oh, well, okay, we've tried that. Let's move on to something else. How do you stick to the knitting and build the confidence to deal with some of those difficult issues?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting because you huddle together, to Perry's expression, you swarm together more regularly. There can be a perception from across the business that you're spending too much time looking in your own mirror. But of course, what people don't see on the outside is that every time you meet, there's a very clear focus on the customer. So there's the external perception. I think if you're going to do this, get a stakeholder that's willing to support you and keep a barrier around you to protect as you work through this process. So that's one. I think another one is not everyone that will be involved in this new way of working will be fully committed to it. There'll be people that will be really anchored to their old ways of working, and they're kind of slightly interested. So I want to be involved, but not fully committed. And you really need, if you're going to do this, you need that level of commitment to make it work. So
how do you deal with those people that are sort of interested and want to come along to a few meetings and look what's going on, but really don't want to work in the new way? How do you deal with them?
Well, the squad does, first of all, right? I mean, they're a self-managing team. I'm not denouncing all responsibility as the global leader for my function, but there's something quite beautiful in that, which is asking people to solve their own problems and to grow up and take the bull by its horns. There were some examples, I have to say, where squad owners, or as we call the product owners, were the wrong ones. They were the wrong people leading a piece of work. And that then came, sometimes. So these are the people that put the dates in the diary, organize the regular meetings. They're not the manager or the leader. They don't exist in a squad, but they're responsible for coordinating the efforts of the squad. And there were a couple of examples we had over the last couple of years where we've had the wrong person leading the wrong activity, because perhaps their heart isn't really in that direction, or they're so focused on delivering actually where they feel that they need to be, but the rest of the squad feels it needs to be something different.
Okay. So let me talk about, to you, Perry, a bit about, how do you build the capability early on to try some of this stuff? Do you bring in externals to facilitate? Do you, as like Bertie did, do a bit of a hybrid, get some people trained up as coaches, use a bit of external support? What's the right way of doing this? I mean, there is no right way, but just some, again, reflections in terms of your experience.
Yeah. So I'd always start with the intent. So like Bertie says, there are some people who are a little bit skeptical. It's like, well, don't worry about it. You'll get your time. So work with the people who are intrigued enough and curious enough to want to play in this space. So start with that. And then you have got a number of options. If you've got an IT team and they run and operate Scrum and Agile, you could quite easily say, come work with us, and we'll help kind of translate and get people to understand how this works. That's one way. Yes, of course, you can buy in externals or go on courses. So my client in Romania sent some of its HR team on Scrum Coach accreditation, and they brought lots and lots of stuff back, and so they were self-teaching that. Two of them were poached by IT, because IT said, not only do you know Scrum, you know people, we want you. But the HR director let them go, because she's like, look, I want to build a good relationship, so we've got this flow. So so my take on it when I get asked to come in is I'll look at your systems and I'll look at your capabilities and I'll help you design both. Keep you in a very sort of strong position to grow the capability, then I disappear because you need to own it. If somebody tries to put a clamp on this of about 3 or 4, 6 months, they're overselling to you because you need a short burst to get that nucleus going, and then you disappear and perhaps just get drawn in every now and then, perhaps when we got stuck on a retrospective or we didn't know what to do with product owners. So I think there's something about that. I did have one client where we deliberately wanted to keep product owners outside of the Agile process, and they would be the recipient of the delivered product. And in fact, we do that quite a lot in our method. So the product owner was like a senior leader who wanted, a new apprenticeship scheme or something, right? So they'd sit outside it, and then we'd have a scrum coach or a squad coach who would liaise with them. And the product owners were like, well, I can see the benefit in that because I don't have to get involved in the administration, but how do I know it's working well, and how do I know they're building what I believe is right? And so we trained them so that they could stand back, provide the air cover, but the scrum coach or the squad coach was the interface between them. Yeah, so really everybody's version of it is going to be different. And so if anybody tells you there's an Agile archetype, they're lying, because there is not one way to do it. By nature, it's Agile. So by nature, it needs to be adaptive and adjusted to where you operate, right? So that's where it needs to be your build, but you do need something to kind of get you going.
So just we've sort of half had this question already, Perry. I suppose it's worth sort of being a bit more explicit. So what are the key things for an HR leader listening to this going, what should they be thinking about, whether they should decide to try Agile, to play with it? What are the things that should be going through their mind that go tick, 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 or cross, cross, cross? I think this is the right time, got the right type of problems, got leadership that want to empower people, want to do things differently. What is it that's the right environment for this to have a chance of flourishing and succeeding?
I'm sure Bertie and I could probably come up with a long list, so I'll start and then maybe Bertie can add in. I would actually start with not just, is this a good way to get projects done or solve problems, but is there a bigger thing I need for my team, which is about more participation, more accountability, more creativity, and more fulfillment in their work for my team? If those things are all questions you haven't got an answer to, this will help you get that. So that's not even about the products you build. That's about the cultural dynamics, and I guess you'd say the advancing sort of progressive nature of what you want your team to do. I think that's a big tick if you're an HR director. And then maybe, Bertie, you might want to add to that with a few of the other tactical ones and maybe even a few strategic ones.
Yeah, increasingly, particularly as I said right at the beginning of this, a big shout out to HR teams at the moment and the tough times we're in. Increasingly, we've got fewer resources. The demands by far have never been bigger, never in my career anyway, that's for sure. And we've got a range of problems which are new world problems and scenarios that frankly we're not prepared for. And we certainly, I don't believe, have been prepared for them all to arrive at the same time. So on that basis, I think particularly now it's useful to think something needs to change. And I really do love your analogy of swarming. That always stuck with me. But something around the problem, something needs to change if we're going to continue to add as much value as we are. And I think that Agile, it sounds like I'm preaching somewhat, but that's because I have become such a big advocate for the value it drives. But I do think it provides a good solution. If I think about all the best management, leadership, communication from when I was in an L&D and talent, if I think about all the best books and seminars and courses that I've been on, what you find is that the best of the best tend to have been extracted and created into something called Agile. It just makes sense. And not everything will work for you.
No, I get that. So
you'll never get it wrong as a leader. Don't worry about what if I get it wrong and I don't know what to select or how to go about this. No fear.
Cool. So tell me just a little bit about some of the, some of the soft benefits, empowerment, creative, different solutions, speed of deployment, lots of things that both you and Perry have talked about. Tell me about some of the hard-nosed results, so I've got, I'm an HR director. I fancy doing some of this. I can see we've got lots of issues in the organization I need to address. I sort of need to convince the chief exec and the FD to give me a bit of air cover. So what do I go and talk to them about in terms of the hard deliverables rather than the soft deliverables? I'm sure they'll be interested in the soft deliverables, but tell me about some of the hard ones. Do you want to go first, Perry?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah. So using Salford as an example, their speed from identification of problem to solution is 4 times quicker. It's not just 4 times quicker, it is using 4 times, I suppose you'd say, less resource drag.
Okay.
Right. So
Yeah.
therefore you are not having so much time sunk into constant, bureaucracy and So 4 times quicker. But, you work that out, and that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Staff engagement, if you want to put a sort of a tag on staff engagement in terms of if you're higher on your staff engagement, is that delivering more value? I think there's probably an equation you could put into that. Everybody I know has seen an uptick by anything between 5 and 15% on staff engagement, because people just feel more like they've got agency over their own work and they get to determine a lot more choice. So there's definitely that. I worked on one team's squad-based project that was looking at the meeting fatigue pre-COVID, right? So this was a meeting-based culture. And so they wanted to come up with something, and their product was smarter meetings. Now, they reckon they saved 36 minutes for every meeting that was held in that organization over an hour and a half. So you multiply that, and all of a sudden you've got a lot more space that people can be doing work and not just meetings. So, there are deliverables that you can measure through this quite succinctly. And in fact, what we do with the Agile stuff when we work with people is impact and benefit is part of your Agile process. You assess it as you're going along. So it's almost no surprise when it delivers. Now, I don't know many other projects that do that.
Cool. A couple of little questions for you. I mean, this is an interesting one. Let's go to you, Per. Can Agile be used as a practice by just one person? Or does it need to be a team that takes the method on? I mean, that's obviously someone who just fancies having a go themselves. I'm not quite sure how you can do Agile when it's just one person, because it's all going to be in one head, isn't it?
I've got 2 stories on that. So one is I work with Macmillan Cancer Support's HR team. One of the L&D team applied the Kanban philosophy of a backlog of tasks to do, doing and done for his own work. And he swore he was about 3 times more efficient with his workload. And then I've got another one which is slightly tongue-in-cheek. Somebody took the Kanban board philosophy back to their kids at home and got them to do chores based on advancing tasks from to do, doing and done. And their kids really enjoyed working in that way. So, some principles of Agile you can do yourself individually. If you've got a piece of work, you can think, who's the users? Going back to Bertie's thing about user stories, start to script them out in a story sense and build a better product. You can use that individually as well as a team. So yes, you can do that.
Okay, I'll give you this question to you, Bertie, a different one. By the way, your jacket's getting lots of compliments. Not a lot about the shirt, Perry, but the jacket's going down a storm. So this one is, so you have lots of good ideas for improvements. How do you document and track these? So do you just want to talk a bit about the sort of the process that you used and stuff with the teams to, I mean, I sort of understand it, but just bring it to life for people.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty is most things that you're doing are documented. So they provide very strong evidence points, not just actually for, probably less so really for an external audience like your leadership teams, but to support your way of working. So everything is pretty much everything is documented and acts as a focus for your discussion and for your work outputs. So it's very much output focused. There's a lot of input stuff around the ceremonies, but a lot of it is output focused, and I think that plays really nicely to being able to demonstrate that you're really driving value, Kevin. Okay. And we use things like so whether it is the storyboards or the Kanbans or all the way along, you can continue to see, are we or are we not driving value?
I like it. Okay, so let's just look at this another way then, Bertie. Tell us about things that didn't work. Tell us about your learning. Things you tried, and think, like with retrospect, I'd do it a different way, or have a different team, or we do it in a different order. It doesn't matter. Just tell us about some of the things that you've learned from this, where it didn't quite work, and you've reflected, learned, and gone again. Yeah,
I found that. So I would jump into a squad every now and again, just kind of go in and visit. And they'd have this rolling member of my team as an Agile coach that would go in periodically. I found that some of the squads didn't want that to happen. So they wouldn't always tell us when they were meeting, because actually they knew that something was going wrong within their squad, but didn't want to expose themselves. I mean, I actually would rather they did. Like, I'm happy that we're exposing weaknesses or things that aren't working, because actually we're working through those. So that was a learning to me. I think people saw that the danger in me being such an advocate of this was that that some people felt that they didn't want to look like they weren't doing it properly. It's not about doing it properly. There are so many different things that you can take and make it your own. And it was about what I love is about continuous improvement. All of this is about, so the fact that some teams felt like that, and I'm not a big scary monster, as hopefully you can see, but we've got a real sense of kind of camaraderie and support in our team globally. We work really collaboratively together, and people don't want to let each other down. So that was certainly a big element. I think second to that was that some of our leadership had an expectation that they want to see a big long plan. So I guess the common theme was, how do you know where you're going if you haven't actually set that down in stone in the first place? Well, the global economy of today, of course, in terms of my comeback, as we can see, is so volatile at the moment. Our business, whilst we have a very clear strategy and direction, flexes with the wind when it needs to in order to be able to adapt to that. And let's be honest, to survive and thrive. So, so our approach is very much to do that. But what gives a lot of people comfort blankets sometimes, I think, is that big, very detailed strategic plan into the future.
So let me just say, so, in terms of your HR strategy then, the things that you and your people and culture team are working on, is it a 10-page document, or is it, here are the 4 squads we're using in the next year to do work in these areas, or is it somewhere in between?
It's probably around a 6-page document. It addresses what are the key business challenges we're looking to address, how have we organised ourselves to deliver this, and then how along that how are we going to ultimately measure success when we get to an end point. And for some of our activity, there is no end point, because we accept that it's a continually evolving ecosystem in the new world of work.
So, Perry, let me come to you. Tell us a bit about some of the things where, I don't know, perhaps you've had to go in and people have got stuck, or they've ground to a halt, or things haven't worked, or there's been some kind of dysfunction. So, what do you take from those experiences when you've had to go in and perhaps people re-energize, rethink, what tends to have happened? Again, I'm trying to look for warts and all, because again, I'm trying to give people, because otherwise we come across as a bit,
I know what you mean.
We're a bit happy clappy, and it's all great, and honestly, it's going to change your world, and it may well do, but I think I'd like people to go in understanding it isn't all easy.
So I had a client with an industrial relations model, and they had a sick absence policy that was, by everybody's definition, not functioning as it should be. So they said, can we apply an agile approach to this? And I said, absolutely you can. Who do you need to work on it? And they were like, well, our union reps, because they help draft it in the first place, our managers, because they have to implement it, and our team in HR, who really are going to have to hold the space for it. Okay, great. So we convened, and what was really, really interesting in that is, because I wanted to turn that into a product, I said, look, your sick absence policy is a product that has features that people need to know when to use and how to use them. Now, managers got that within a nanosecond. The HR team got it within a nanosecond. The union guys absolutely didn't know what I was talking about at all. They couldn't see a sick absence policy as a product. And so that was a first sticking point, really, which was I used language to try and break away from something that had not been solved before, and it just jarred incredibly badly with them. So I had to change the frame on that. Now, that was some really tough yards for me in the space of being a bit like a scrum coach, like Bertie's saying. So I withdrew from that and said, look, I got you so far. Now I think you might need to carry on traditionally in that. But actually, to their credit, the HR team didn't give that up. They still worked on it in an iterative way. And eventually they got to a better sick absence policy. But that's one of the first moments I thought, crikey, when people don't get it, they really can put the barriers up and just go, I just don't know what you mean. I just don't understand it. And so that was a big lesson for me. I've also gone into a client where they've had a coaching program that's been supremely underwhelming, i.e. nobody taking it up. So we started to use the Agile technique to try and come up with what's getting in the way, what's not working for this. Within about 3 weeks, they had more people join in the coaching program than ever before. But it took them 3 years of ploughing away before they realised some of this could work. Now, the only thing about that was they thought they'd solved the problem. So it's like, great, we've got loads of people signed up. But they didn't do enough to then service that increased demand. So they set themselves up to fail. So sometimes your Agile construct needs to go beyond an initial problem and into maybe adjacent or successional problems. But we just got a bit excited that we had big sign-ups. So we took our eye off the ball. So yeah, there are a couple of times where it'll catch you out.
Okay, I'm just going to do the next poll just to find out what people are thinking. So you've listened to us. We've been talking for about 45, 50 minutes, giving you lots of examples, trying to bring it to life for you. So this question is, should HR adopt an Agile approach? You can strongly agree, neither agree or disagree. But also, I suspect some of you might want to say, I'm really not convinced, and that's fine too. I'm just interested to see why your thinking is at the moment. And then to Perry and Bertie, I'm going to come back with a sort of final question, really, which is, your one piece of advice. Someone was clearly spent the time to listen to us for an hour, so they were interested enough. What would be your, what's your, your elevator pitch for Agile HR? Let's keep going, guys. I think we've had a few people drop off. We've only had 60% of people vote. Let's get a few more votes in. Come on, let's have a little bit of more feedback. Okay. Well, the good news is I think people are coming with us, guys. There's seems to be 40% of people strongly agree, 50% of people agree, and only 10% aren't sure. Well, I think that's pretty good, actually. So let's go. Let's give you the first chance then, Bertie. You elevate the pitch. I'm an HR director. I'm thinking about Agile. Why should I do it?
Do it because it's an opportunity to really energize and engage your team in a way that you've probably never done or seen. Across all disciplines, getting them focused on genuine problems. Do it because it puts customer at the heart of everything you do. Is there any better way to drive a powerful employee experience than that? Very critically. Do it because you'll be able to deliver much more regularly, little things much more regularly. And that's way better than the Big Bang in my book. But be careful. Be careful. Be careful because and I'm always aware that I come across a little bit preachy like this, and people could be really put off by that. So be careful on that. Be sure to make sure that you're building, if you're going to do this, that you're building in some expertise. Either you're bringing it in or you're building it within the team to be able to support this way of working, because you will need that. The first 4 or 5 months, you'll really get the benefit from doing that. The good news is, particularly in these hard times, that investment, even if you're going to buy it in or build it, does not come at a huge cost. And also keep an eye on your team. Make sure that your leadership teams or your immediate teams continue to feel that they have what they need to be able to drive this, and in terms of the support, because you may feel that some very early on get turned off.
Okay, I've had a question from Diane Tomlinson as we speak about, does this help HR join up with other parts of HR, but more importantly with other parts of the business? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but you might just want to elaborate, Bertie, and then I'll give you the question in a sec, Perry.
So yes, it does. In fact, there are some examples where our squads are made up, have been not currently where we're at, but in the past have been made up of people from different functions. Whether that's somebody from technology, not just P&C or HR, or even from finance, because you're getting that different blend of challenge and experience in that. But again, whilst you're in a squad, all voices are equal, and that's really important to say. Okay,
I like that. Thank you for that. So, Perry, tell us a bit about, your elevator pitch, why you think this is important to HR directors and why they should take a chance and try something different.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it comes to your opening gambit, really, Kevin, which is the world outside is, it's not just unpredictable. It's absolutely out of the ordinary in every dimension. So therefore, we cannot continue to use ordinary solutions. And I think there is something in here about the curse of core competence, right? If you always throw your experts at your same problems, you are never going to get creative and disruptive thinking that challenges that convention. Agile gives you the chance to, by design, get away from the usual suspects and get different people involved. And I think HR's calling card needs to be difference. It needs to show difference, respect difference, and deliver differently. And if you want to stand for those, this is a really accelerated way to get there. So that would be my pitch.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to bring our webinar to an end. I wanted to thank Bertie and Perry for spending the time. I think it's been a great conversation. I've taken quite a lot from it. I've made quite a lot of notes. I think we can see from the poll at the end that people have woken up to it as an opportunity to do something different. And without your two views, opinions, experience and guidance, I don't think we'd have got there. So thank you for spending the time with us today, Bertie and Perry. For those of you that are on, may want to go back and look at some of our other webinars. We've got one on well-being, one on people strategy, one on the whole piece around performance management, another one around culture with John Amamichi, which is definitely worth a look. Please take the time to go back and look at the other webinars. There's a series of podcasts. I've interviewed, I think, 26 HR directors already. There's another couple to come out. There's some great content, and there's a big reset on the 22nd of October. Big virtual event, 30 different roundtables, seminars, keynotes, where I would certainly recommend you taking a look at that. And if you're unaware of the Circal platform, it's all free at the moment. So why not take the opportunity to have a look at it and join up? The people seem to be saying they found this incredibly useful. Ruth Sharp, the panelists, I've enjoyed today's webinar. It's given me things to think about I didn't think I need to think about, which is not a bad place. And people have been very, very positive. So thanks, Perry. Thanks, Bertie. Thank you all for listening. We really do appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Brilliant.